Brilliant. Okay, so if you're joining us live, then please feel free to add your questions to the chat. Rue and I thought we'd kind of talk through kind of our experiences and kind of things that we wish we'd known about teaching abroad before we actually did it. But that'll just be a few short slides, and then we were going to give people time for question and answer. So please, as I said, just add questions to the chat as they come into your head, basically. If there's anything specific that you've come for today, please put that in the chat as well. Okay, so just to give you an overview of what the session will involve today, we're going to talk about who can teach abroad first of all, and then we're going to talk a little bit about why we both chose to teach abroad. And then we're going to talk about kind of the procedural aspects, so how to find a school and when to apply. And then, as I said before, we've got time for Q&A as well. So who can teach abroad? We had a really good chat about this, didn't we, really, when we were putting this together? It's quite interesting because teaching abroad, when we say teaching abroad, I think in this webinar we're specifically talking about teaching in international schools, because there's lots of different ways that you can work abroad as a teacher. So, for example, you could teach English as an additional language in kind of adult colleges and that sort of thing. But our experience is very much in international schools, so that's schools where English is the main language or the kind of the first language that people communicate in, and often they will use a British curriculum, so which is based on the national curriculum that we're used to. So that's kind of the kind of setting that we're thinking about primarily today. Rue, did you want to talk us through kind of the difference between the curriculums that you might find in international schools?
Yeah, so there are lots of different routes into teaching abroad, and as Jen said, we're going to look at primarily at the international school sector, but the international school sector also has its differences within it as well. So when you're actually looking for jobs, it's really useful to have a look at the curriculum that the school teaches, which is really clearly articulated on all school websites. So there's a group of schools, a large group of schools that use the British curriculum. And by that, they call it the British curriculum, but they mean the English curriculum. So rather than Scottish and Wales and Irish, Northern Irish curriculum. So what you look for in terms of those, when you're looking for schools, there are schools which are kind of verified schools for teaching an English curriculum. And those schools tend to sign up to something called COBIS, which is the Council of British International Schools. And one source, as we'll talk about later, of job adverts when you're looking for the right school for you is to look on COBIS, who actually use TES International as like their basis for advertising schools. But they do that through their own website, so you can kind of know that you're going to a school that has a really familiar curriculum that you can speak to in your application, but also that you'll be familiar with when you're over there. Some schools, and I would say in my experience, most schools that are teaching the English curriculum actually have a lot of freedom in what they do with that curriculum. So whilst a lot of schools take the curriculum as a basis, they will often expand on that. And many schools won't do SATs, for example, because it's not relevant for children's progression to the international schools in terms of the secondary schools that they'll attend. So have a look at those kinds of things when you're looking. The other context that you might come across is international schools that are not called British schools abroad. They're called international schools, and they often use the primary years programme. So this is a programme that breaks down the international baccalaureate into the middle years programme and the primary years programme. And there's an early years programme as well. So in the primary years programme, it's completely different to the English curriculum. It is an inquiry-based approach, not kind of thinking of inquiry in terms of topics, but very much child-led inquiry-based approach. So it's very, very different. And sometimes those schools might be looking for you to have experience in PYP. So it's just kind of looking at the job advert and seeing, are they willing to put the effort in to train you up in PYP, because it's a very different approach, or are they looking for experience? And finally, there's another curriculum that tends to be very popular called the Cambridge Primary Programme, which is a model of the English curriculum, but has some core differences. So have a look around that and have a look on the Cambridge Primary Programme website as well.
Another kind of aspect to consider is where you are in your profession, where you are in your professional development as well. So I know lots of people around the table will be kind of qualifying this year and then be going into their ECT induction years in September. And again, now that we have the ECT induction programme, it's unlikely that you'll find an international school that will kind of support you through that. And that's for two reasons. One, obviously, that induction programme takes investment, and it might be that international schools aren't wanting to kind of put that investment in at this stage. But also, most international schools, even before the ECT induction programme, always required teachers to have a couple of years experience as a minimum. So when I was looking for jobs in an international school, most of the adverts I saw would say things like at least 2 years experience, at least 4 years experience in some cases. So international schools do tend to want you to have had some experience of teaching as a paid teacher before you then apply to them. And then some jobs as well will also require you to have a European passport as well. That was one of the requirements of the school that I taught in. Is there anything else around passport considerations, Rue?
Yeah, just thinking about some of the schools in Europe, especially schools in Italy and Spain at the moment, are actually requiring you to have a European rather than a British passport. So post-Brexit, a lot of schools are choosing not to go down the route of paying for visas. So looking for teachers that already have a European passport. So it's thinking about, which passport do you have, and checking the job advert to make sure that they accept applicants who have a British passport rather than a European one.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's have a chat then about kind of why we did it in the first place and our experiences. So this is a picture of the so I taught abroad for 1 year, and I taught in a school in Bangkok in Thailand, and this is a picture of the school that you can see, and that's Bromsgrove International School. So we were affiliated with Bromsgrove School in the UK, which is in the Midlands, and we were kind of the Thai kind of basis for we were that school in Thailand. So we had connections with that school, but we weren't kind of we had a lot of autonomy over how we wanted to run our school as well. In terms of our classrooms, we had really lovely classrooms. They weren't as they probably weren't as well resourced as I had been used to in England, but we had everything that we needed. It was just a case sometimes of kind of working out, well, if I want to do that particular activity, which resources are available to me, and how can sometimes I needed to adapt things to make things work. But the facilities that we had in the school were absolutely amazing. So you can see there's a picture there of our auditorium, which was basically our school hall, and that was our primary production of Aladdin. And it was absolutely fantastic, the kind of opportunities we were able to give the children in terms of performance and drama and theatre. Equally, they had amazing sporting opportunities. So there were lots of opportunities for kind of competing with other international schools and taking part in tournaments. And you can see there as well, that's a picture of our it was called the primary atrium, and it was like the indoor play area for the children. They had the outdoor play area as well, and then they could kind of come and go as they pleased at lunchtime. It was a through school, so our youngest children were 2 years old, and the oldest students we went up to A level, so year 13, and that meant that I had my year 3s walking through school at lunchtime alongside these really tall teenagers, and that was a little bit kind of that was a strange thing to see at first, something I wasn't used to back in the UK. But that through school, it was really lovely, because you kind of there was a strong sense of identity as a school, and every student had that strong sense of identity about we belong to Bromsgrove. In terms of a primary identity for our primary children, it was a little bit trickier. So things like year 6 weren't the oldest children in the school anymore, so they didn't get that they didn't always get automatically get that year 6 responsibility that you see in most primary schools in the UK. So we had to do things like we brought in like a head boy and a head girl for primary, so we mirrored what secondary were doing to try and draw that distinction between primary and secondary. Another thing we did was we didn't have like a leavers assembly at the end of the year for year 6. We had a stepping up assembly because the idea was they were going on to year 7 and they wouldn't leave our school, they'd carry on in year 7. So just, you know, changes. There were slight differences. The through school aspect kind of gave us those changes. Obviously, being in Thailand, there were really different cultural aspects to the school practice as well, to the school day, not so much to the pedagogy, but kind of to how the day and how the year worked. So, for example, we started every morning with everyone standing silently, listening to the Thai national anthem as it was played throughout the school and the flag was raised. And that signalled the start of the day. And no matter where you were in the school, you had to stand still and then welcome the children in. The language was obviously a very different was obviously very different. There's no overlap between Thai and English languages in terms of their roots. So it was a whole new language to get our heads around for those of us who are from Britain. And lots of the children spoke Thai or Mandarin as their home language, and then they were expected to teach to learn in English. So we were quite reliant often on our teaching assistants, who tended to be Thai nationals, and they would often they wouldn't translate necessarily kind of key aspects of learning, but if we were having a conversation about something that was particularly conceptual, like I was trying to explain what the school council would do once to my primary kids, and I needed my Thai teaching assistant then to explain what a school council was so that they could understand. Another thing that made this school quite different to my experience in the UK was that it was a boarding school. So lots of the children were boarders. We had I think it was about a third of the children were boarders and 2/3 of the children would go home at the end of the day. Even then, the children that were going home, all of them would be driven. There weren't any children walking. So it wasn't the type of school where you'd walk, you know, down the road, and it would be people from the local area that were at that school. Everybody was in 4x4s and minibuses and things like that. But some children were boarders. And that was quite tricky because kind of, you know, you'd start the working day, the Thai national anthem would play, and you'd be meeting children that had kind of been around others since about 7 o'clock, 6:30 that morning. And they didn't, you know, so they didn't often get lots of downtime. They were always in a big group of children. So that was kind of managing their well-being was different to managing the well-being of children that would go home every night. And also Friday evening or Friday afternoon home time was really special because that's when everybody, or mostly everybody, got to go home to their families. And then also, with it being a boarding school, it was a fee-paying school as well. So the parents were essentially funding the school. And so the parents' role was it was more like a customer, much more like a customer than it is in the UK. So we had to, there was much more collegiate work with the parents than I was used to in the UK. And kind of decisions about the school were made, the opinion of the parents or the kind of views of the parents were kind of one of the driving factors in kind of you know, decisions that were made about the school. So that's the school. Those are some of the kind of the particularities of the school. I mentioned as well, like the kind of the school year, with it being such a big school, with it being a through school, there were lots of events that happened, but the way things were organised were often more like a secondary school rather than a primary school. So I probably had more autonomy over what I taught and what the curriculum would look like, because I was involved in the curriculum development of the school. But I had less autonomy over kind of the educational visits and the school trips and the events and things that we were part of. So you can see there's a picture of, the first picture is of the school fun run that happens every year. And that was organised by the PE department for secondary and for primary. And obviously we, as primary, it was organised for secondary first, and then it was adapted for primary. And there were lots of events like that were, you know, it was decided they were happening, and then how do we adapt it for primary, and then we had to fit in with that. Similarly, we've got on the right, there's the Christmas fair, which was again, I wasn't entirely sure if we'd be celebrating Christmas with us being in Thailand, but we did. You can see we've got a Christmas tree in the middle of our auditorium, and sorry, in the middle of our atrium. And again, it was arranged for secondary, so the secondary students put on all these stalls, and then it was, okay, how will it be adapted for primary? And it ended up being a safeguarding nightmare because some parents came, some parents didn't come, children were walking around independently. So again, it was just that kind of working out how to fit in. There were some fantastic events as well. Like, all of these events were really, really enjoyable as well. So the bottom right hand corner, we've got that's me and my class celebrating Loy Krathong, which is the Thai water festival, and it happens around the end of November, beginning of December. And the Thai department in the school organises for all the staff to wear traditional Thai dress, and everyone's, you know, wearing traditional ceremonial clothes, and it was an absolutely amazing day. And then as well, you can see on the bottom left, that was the sleepover that I had to organise for my class. And again, that was just something that happens every year. Year 3 and year 4 have a sleepover. Oh, and by the way, you're organising it, kind of thing. So, and it was also a little bit of an advert for boarding, to kind of, you know, maybe some of these children would like to be boarders later on as well. So there's all these, like, you know, different lenses that you end up looking at the events through that you don't necessarily get back in the UK. One other thing was that the constant people in that school were the Thai staff and the parents and the students. The international teachers, you know, so the British expats and people like that, would change quite regularly. So again, there was very much, you know, you were fitting in with the Thai culture, but you were also fitting in with this school. And although the teachers were kind of had high status, there was also this feeling of needing to fit in with the school as well, because, you know, it's the children's education that's at stake, and the parents, you know, care very deeply about it. So it's this, you know, it's a really interesting balance between fitting in, but then also, you know, being able to make a difference and kind of lead in certain areas as well. And then finally, as well as having, you know, as well as the school being kind of such a different experience, life was a different experience as well. So there were loads in Southeast Asia. There were loads of opportunities for traveling. So I travelled around different parts of Thailand, and then I also travelled around different parts of Asia as well. So I got to go to Hong Kong. I got to go to Malaysia. It was absolutely fantastic. Having said that, on the weekends where, you know, we arranged to travel and kind of you know, go on adventures, those weekends were absolutely brilliant and really exciting. And things like, you know, like the half-term holidays, you could do stuff like that as well. But then the weekends where those things weren't happening, you know, and everyday life kind of continued, I suppose things were a bit quieter, because you might have formed quite close friendships with people, but you didn't have, like, necessarily the deep kind of, you know, the long-term friendships that you would have had back at home, possibly, or the family connections that you'd have back at home. So it was this weird balance again between really, really exciting, but then very quiet everyday life as well. And, you know, in the evenings, there were lots of opportunities to go out with people and kind of, you know, have really nice evenings and social evenings. But those social times, it wasn't the same as kind of, you know, the best friends that you have for life. It was lovely people to spend time with at that point, who were, you know, in a similar boat to you, having, you know, moved abroad for the first time and teaching in the same school as you and things. That top right hand picture there, that was my view from my bedroom. I got really lucky with the flat that I ended up living in, and that was one of, you know, that view is imprinted in my memory, because it's like the sky. I don't think you can quite see it there, but you can see the skyline of Bangkok. And then this picture, the picture just below it, that was our local, so the Red Onion pub, and that's where we spend quite a few evenings. So yeah, that's my kind of a very brief summary of my experience, and so I'll pass over to Rue to talk about hers.
That's so lovely, Jen. It's really nice to hear about different people's experiences. I have a lot of what you've said actually resonates with my experience as well, actually. So I won't kind of repeat anything that you've gone over, and I'll just try and kind of pick out some of the nuances of the two experiences that I'd like to talk about today. So and that's in the British School in Milan in Italy and the British School in Tokyo in Japan. It's interesting actually that when you go to work abroad, you'll encounter some people who have gone to the school and intended to stay for 2 years and ended up staying for 20 and get married there and have children, and they just love it so much. And you'll experience others that spend a couple of years, because contracts tend to be between 2 or 3 years initially, so you have to commit to being there for 2 or 3 years because of the investment that the school makes in bringing you over to the country, which we'll talk about later in terms of packages that are available.